Hello, and welcome to Chapter 1 of our textbook for History 111. Our first chapter is going to be talking about the origins of humans, basically from prehistory to around 15,000 or so. This chapter basically is unique in the textbook because it covers the entire world. The rest of the chapters in your textbook will go region by region. However, in this chapter, we're talking about watching the humans race, hominids, move out of Africa and move into various parts of the world. So let's get started. So we're going to be talking about various different types of hominids, uh, where they are from. Pay particular attention to the types of sources that are used during this chapter. So we see very, very early on the development of what scientists call homonyms. They call them that because they are not quite humans. They have many traits of humans. In other words, they are bipedal, meaning they walk on two legs, not on four, and they walk upright. In doing this, they become far more efficient in moving in certain ways. They tend to lose some of the strength of their upper body. Being ground dwellers means that they're in an entirely new range of predators, and so they have a certain number of creatures to be afraid of now, and they certainly cannot outrun some of their predators. However, they are more adaptable to their environment. They can move. They are no longer stuck in one place, say the jungle. They can go to a wider variety of locations: jungle, savanna, desert, forest. Uh, there's kind of a reason why you see uh, certain animals only live in certain climates in certain places, but not in others. But we see humans everywhere. And that walking upright is going to allow humans to go everywhere and adapt to it. One of the benefits of being upright is, of course, you now have the use of your hands. And with the use of the hands, with that opposable thumb, all of a sudden we can pick things up and do something that's absolutely, totally uh, commonplace every day that you would do. And that is pick something up and move it around and look at the front and look at the back and look at the side and look up under it. What this tends to do is uh, get the brain more stimulated and gets the brain thinking. And so, hence, just the movement, just the manipulation of objects is going to give our brain a nice little start. Uh, Something you probably know about homonyms and humans. We don't have very strong hands. We don't have massive incisors. We don't have claws, except for Wolverine. Um, and so we need help getting our food. That is, if we are just pulling berries off of bushes, no big deal. But berries aren't in season all the time. So what do we eat in those times that the berries aren't in season? Well, In order to find more food and to develop it and to adapt to these different environments, humans are going to adopt tools, both using tools, using found objects, and creating tools. Now, we used to think that humans were set apart from other mammals because we made tools. Then we found out through the observation of animals that we're not the only ones who make tools. There are other creatures that actually manufacture tools and use tools for certain purposes. Uh, a particular tribe of chimpanzee will strip the bark off of a green stick so that it's the cambium layer is very sticky, and they will put that stick down into a termite nest, and the termites will get stuck on that sticky stick, and they'll just eat it off. So that's actually manufacturing a tool. So we kind of lost that little definition of humans, but the tools gave us uh, an, all sorts of new abilities. If you think of tools, tools are nothing more than allowing us to extend our natural grasp in terms of cutting things, in terms of smashing things, in terms of just doing anything you want to do during the day. It's very natural for us to pick up some sort of tool. Uh, but with these tools, with these new tools, comes an entirely broader range of food. And so we homonyms start to develop in different ways. So we talk about this very earliest period of homonyms as the Paleolithic era, because we have to make it a fancy term. Paleo is the Greek for old, lithic is the Greek word for stone. It's essentially the old stone age, or if you've ever been on the paleo diet, that's what they mean. The Paleolithic era is in the ideas of people who created this diet, eating a diet that's more like the Paleolithic people ate. But this era that we'll be talking about began about 2.5 million years ago, and it's going to last until about 11,600 years ago. We're going to go through a real revolution that's going to change humanity around 11,600 years ago. But for right now, we're going to be talking about these Paleolithic people. The earliest examples of homonyms in this Paleolithic era we find in this range of mountains on the easternmost side of the continent of Africa, areas that we now know as Kenya, Ethiopia, and a few going down into South Africa. But the main finds are in Kenya. And it seemed that that was a region that was extremely hospitable for these early homonyms. We find not only the remains of humans, but we also find their tools. Now, how would, generally speaking, an anthropologist or an archaeologist basically pick up a rock and say, this is a rock and this is a tool? You can see by that axe, that is a stone axe as it's been labeled. It looks like a broken stone, but it's not broken in just one plane, as you would expect a stone that has maybe been rolled down the hill, or frost has split it open, or any sorts of things that happen to a stone. What we see in this kind of tool is uh, striked striking that has chipped it along multiple planes. In other words, it's been formed to do a job. And this basic tool, this axe that you're seeing on screen, it's got a rounded part that would have probably been held in these early hominins' palms, and it they would have used the sharper areas to uh, break open animal bones, to chop wood, perhaps not, in a very crafty way, but uh, it's a lot easier to break things open than just trying to do it physically. So, the early tools. So we see as time goes on in these homonyms, we see by the different actual bones and bone fragments left behind that we do see uh, their actual physical bodies differ. Um, we can tell that they are different than chimpanzees because we look at the hips, and we see the hips are turned, that allow us an upright stance, as opposed to gorillas and chimpanzees, which who can walk on their two legs, but it's a kind of a back and forth, very awkward sort of movement, but they mostly prefer to walk on all fours. These early homonyms, especially Homo erectus, which means upright man, is going to have that bone structure that basically says this creature is different than gorillas, than chimpanzees, bonobos, all of our closest mammalian relatives. And they have a larger brain case, much closer to ours than, say, a gorilla or chimpanzee. But we start finding these Homo erectus remains uh, dated around 1.8 million years ago in Africa. We start finding them in Eastern Europe and in Southeast Asia. So obviously they have moved out. We don't find hominin remains outside of Africa that are as old as 2.5 million years, but we do around 1.8 million years find these remains outside of Africa. And we do find tools that they have left behind in areas as far away from each other as Java, China, and Spain. That is a huge range of area. It would be a challenge to find any other mammal that actually had that kind of a range. So these are creatures, these homonyms that moved all over the place and adapted with their bigger brains. So these Homo erectus, and there are other related creatures, the Australopithecus, uh, Afarensis, etc. We've been calling them homonyms because they are not fully modern humans. We do see in Africa, in that eastern area of Africa, around 200,000 years ago, we start seeing what we would recognize as modern humans. Um, they were different than the earlier homonyms with their technical skills and creativity. They left behind a lot more things than just uh, very crudely made stone tools. We think they started as foragers, but as they got to different climates and consistent foraging during the course of the year was not available. As you get north, further north out of Africa, then you start having seasons. And things that you would forage for, such as wild grass seeds, rice seeds, um, berries, roots and tubers, they might not be available all year long. Uh, but getting getting good at hunting allows you to have a much wider choice of diets and be able to feed yourself during the colder months. We also find left behind not just practical tools, but ornaments, sculptures, paintings. This is, if you want to have a real difference between other creatures and humans, if you want to look at these things that are truly symbolic that these early humans would make, um, or the Homo sapiens, as we call the modern human, um, to make representations of something else. That's a huge step. That takes a lot of brain power. So around we see traces of these modern humans that date around 200,000 years ago, and we see traces of them between 80 and 60,000 years ago. They're going to be moving to Asia. They're not going to go into Europe yet. They're basically going to go to the north part of Africa and take a right, um, and head towards Asia. 80 to 60,000 years ago. We also have to keep in mind that weather was different. They might not have had to have crossed deserts, and areas that we think of deserts today might not have been deserts back then. There have been drastic changes in climates and weather patterns that are going to affect humans. So we can't imagine the world being exactly as it is today. We'll be talking a lot about climate and environment and geography and its effect on humans. We'll be talking a lot about that in the course of this class. So, the modern human, those ideas of symbolic representation or artwork, that is a way that we can look at what they left behind and say, hey, these are our forebears. Because we love making stuff. We love drawing pictures, uh, even writing on walls. Um, that's something that is a very human trait. So, moving out of Africa, the earliest of the groups, as we trace them, moved, as I said, into Asia, and they will be traveling by land. Um, as we follow the purple arrows going into various places. And they're also going to be traveling by sea. We're going to see considerable amount of sea travel, not out of the sight of land. Pardon me. They're going to be using small boats, hollowed out logs, uh, moving down the coast. In some places, that's an easier way to move around. Um, and we are going to see them stretching into places such as Malaysia and Indonesia, and into all of these islands and into Australia. That's a very important and special group, but it won't be until a little bit later, around 40,000 years ago, that we see them move out of Europe and into out of Asia, I'm sorry, and into Europe. So moving into South Asia, the areas we know as China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and moving into Indonesia, those islands. Um, as I say, the climate wasn't quite always the same. And we think that they moved into those islands sometimes by land bridges that were there at the time but are no more, or they took advantage of uh, the extreme ice ages that are going to be affecting that area quite frequently. But Australia is a very different process to get there because for a lot of Indonesia, you could physically stand on one island and see the other island, and you could move in that area on a wooden plank boat, and it wouldn't be that scary. But uh, the when you get to the southernmost part of those Indonesian islands, when you look directly south, yes, Australia is there, but you cannot see it from those islands. Now, to set out on a simple wooden plank boat south and hope there's something there, that would be a huge gamble. I don't know if people would have taken that gamble. So, how did they know there was something there? Uh, a lot of anthropologists think that it was because that area often has fires. Australia is prone to bushfires, as they call them, and they, the people on the island to the north of Australia, could see the fire, the smoke going up, and basically imagine, well, water doesn't burn, it takes land to burn, so therefore there's land down there. Um, so a very intrepid group made it to Australia by wooden planks, but keep in mind they couldn't see the island there. Um, when they got to Australia, they found a very different climate and a few large predators. And the people who made it to Australia basically hunted the large predators. They are gone. There are traces of some, but by about 16,000 years ago, there weren't any more traces of these larger predators. Now, the there's plenty in Australia that can kill you. They're just a lot smaller. Those the kangaroos are pretty big, and they're really, really fast, and you don't want to play with them. They're not cute and cuddly little guys. In fact, if you uh, see kangaroos, there's certain big kinds that are just look like they've been working out, and taking the steroids. They're like really buff. Anyway, I'm off subject. So the Aborigines, who which is the name of the people who made it to Australia, uh, they tended to be a very unusual and interesting group because there was enough food that they never got out of that phase of hunting and gathering. I'm going to be talking soon about the agricultural revolution that's going to be coming up, and the Aborigine people did not go through that. However, they did keep an oral tradition of their earlier times. So we have, in essence, a very old tradition of the Aboriginal societies, the very old societies, but it's a very different story than the ones we think of in the other areas we'll be studying. The Aborigine called that very early time the dream time. that it is so far in the past, it seems like a dream. We'll be talking a lot about these old customs of different people. It's the myths and the stories and what the stories they tell about themselves are really quite fascinating. Anyway, the Aborigines, though, they might not have picked up on agriculture as all of the other areas would be doing soon, but they will be extremely busy controlling their environment. They're going to be setting bushfires to help in hunting, to renew vegetation, allows the vegetation to grow back green and vibrant. So they will make a very permanent, obvious mark on the land. Uh, it just won't be from agriculture. So we'll have a couple of different species of hominin, of humans, travel into Europe from Asia, pardon me, and from Africa. The earliest group of hominins that make it into Europe uh, were called Neanderthals. The earliest remains of these uh, early hominins was found in a cave in an area known as Neanderthal, and so that's how they get their names. And that is a very early group that was in Europe about 1.8 million years ago. The Homo sapiens, the modern humans, are going to move in much, much, much later, about 35,000 years ago, and spread throughout Europe. So, as we talked about, um, leaving paintings on the walls seems to be pretty universal. Wherever humans go, they left their mark. And sometimes it was painted, sometimes it was carved. Um, they might have left other things behind. However, we they might have been made out of materials that would rot very easily. So when we find something like rock art, like the sculptures we're going to talk about, they're rarities, but we shouldn't hang everything on just these objects, because these are objects that lasted that long. Um, and so consequently, they're not going to give us the full picture. And when you talk to people who specialize in studying this rock art, uh, even rock art that was created only maybe 10,000 years ago or maybe 5,000 years ago, we can't tell what they're saying. There's, you know, the researchers who study it are not going to say, "Oh, absolutely, we're looking at X." Uh, we don't know. A lot of this is a mystery. So it is fun to see, fun to look at and think about. Whoop. So these Homo sapiens sites, they left little figurines and rock paintings. The figurines were small. Some were created in ivory, which of course is the elephant tusks, or mastodon tusks, or mammoth tusks, or the tusks of walruses. All of these are like very big teeth, and they are a substance known as ivory. Uh, and it's very rare to find ivory today. Usually um, it's in museums because it takes killing the animal to get those pieces of ivory. So ivory was extremely valuable, and it lasts a long time, and it has a certain feel, a certain look to it. Rock, of course, uh, lasts for a long time, but it is, it can be eroded by wind, eroded by water, split by ice, that sort of thing. But a figurine in rock is going to tend to um, stick around. Clay figurines, of course, if you've played with clay, you know that it's water and dirt. It's fun to play with. You can shape it into lots of different things, but when it gets wet, it melts, turns into muddy water. But if you fire it, then it becomes hard. Figuring out that you can make it get hard by firing, that's pretty clever. So that is a really big step towards creating something and then having a process to make it last longer. Uh, but most of these paintings and rock engravings show humans and animals. I think maybe we see humans and animals in those rock paintings because to our eyes, they are obvious. But there's also other things that are painted on the rocks or engraved into these rocks that we might not be able to interpret. Those people back then could. And so, as I said before, it's dangerous to assume we understand what these paintings and these engravings are saying. So they make for an interesting study. We think that they might have been memory aids. Uh, we found bear at this spot, maybe, and they drew bears there. They might have been an aid to teach your kid if they're going out hunting. You have a picture of the mastodon, and then you can point and teach your children where the best place to put your spear into the mastodon is, that sort of thing. It could have been a teaching aid, or it could have been for ritual uses. And that last one, um, a lot of anthropologists think that's really high on the probability of these items, that they were part of a religious ritual, um, part of a ceremonial purpose. So, yeah, it's interesting to see them. Here are three examples of carvings that had been left behind. This one is in uh, bone or perhaps ivory. One that is carved, I think, that it might be wood or it might be bone again, and this is one is carved out of rocks. Um, you will see when you're reading books about this, the animal carvings are obvious. Uh, you will see when they're talking about figures of women. This is obviously a human woman, and they'll call them Venus, the Venus of so and so, and the Venus of this. It's kind of a uh, rift on ancient sculpture. When we study the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, they had a lot of sculptures of Venus, and they were always naked. And so the people who started finding these sculptures were kind of carrying on that tradition of calling them Venus of whatever. And here is um, some more rock paintings. As your textbook points out, this is a bison of some sort. It's been uh, poked with a spear, and then you have a prone man lying there and a broken spear. So obviously there is a story behind this, and also a bird hanging out. So there might be a story behind it. There might be some sort of ritual behind it. But we will find that um, a little bit after uh, these, no, actually about the same time that the modern humans are moving into Europe from Asia, there's another group moving out of Asia and going east. This is one of those situations where I said, remember, the climate and everything is not going to be the same then as it is today. We think of these these early men moving, early humans, sorry, moving into Siberia and Alaska, and it's cold and it's ice. And how did they make it through? Well, there was an ice age between 2300 and 16,500 years ago. It's 23,000 to 16,500 years ago. And in Ice Age, of course, we think of these large sheets of ice that are going to form. All of this blue would have been a huge sheet of ice. Uh, and it's not nice flat. It's crevices, it's um, all sorts of difficult times moving around on it. So it's not a nice flat thing to walk on. But what happens in an ice age is that that water that goes in to make ice is pulled out of the ocean, and it basically leaves areas between continents, between islands, uh, bare. So that there were areas between Siberia and Alaska that could be transversed on foot. And that's how they suppose that there's going to be two separate migrations moving into the Americas. Because the homonyms had never made it to North and South America. It is going to be, of course, the modern humans that make it. Um, but this ice age is going to reveal all sorts of new pathways for humans to move on. So between 23,000 and 16,500 years ago, that ice created new pathways between continents, certain continents, and between certain islands. And the humans that had been moving around had, ways to adapt to the cold. They had superior survival skills, actually more superior survival skills than the Neanderthals, which is why the Neanderthals will die out, but the modern humans do not. So, these modern humans devised ways of keeping warm, making clothes out of furs, etc., etc. And so they developed these skills to survive, and they moved around a lot. But that ice age, that movement of the ice age, created land bridges throughout Malaysia and Indonesia, created land bridges between Korea and Japan, and of course, the land bridge between Asia and North America. So that land bridge between Asia and North America, some of it was ice free, so it provided places for humans to live. Of course, now it's underwater, so it would be very, very difficult to find any traces of them. But the advancing ice would keep them trapped in that area, in that land bridge. This is the speculation of the time. And so uh, there we have evidence of essentially two separate migrations out of Beringia. One was around 16,000 and another was around 13,500. And the speculation goes as this. There was one group in Beringia who built boats and sailed these boats along the coastline of North America, coming down, what we now know as Alaska, what we now know as British Columbia, and moving into the North America that way, but essentially staying on the coastlines, as opposed to a later group that came when the ice split up enough that they could actually do mass migration. And of course, if the ice is splitting up and melting, that means the land bridge is going to go away. So they probably had no choice but to leave that area that they had been living on. So we see evidence of two very different groups, two very different times. So we have one group that went by sea, and we have another group that perhaps went by land and made it into the more inland areas. But the remains that we find show that they are two groups at very different times. And eventually, they're going to make it through Mesoamerica or Central America and into South America, some still by sea, others by land. So I don't know how they tell the difference. It might be an interesting thing to study how they, in fact, tell the difference between these two groups. But one of the episodes that made us aware of these very early migrations was the finding in a river of a skull near the city of Kennewick. And this skull, they had thought it was Native American, the local Native American community. But it's with all sorts of testing, it seemed to be much older than that particular community had been there. So Kennewick Man was fought over. Scientists wanted to study it more because it was one of the few examples that they had of these very early migrants from Beringia. But the local Native Americans felt that he had been a member of their tribe, therefore they wanted to take care of the remains in a respectful way. So Kennewick Man is a special situation. And this fighting over him has only happened in the past like 30 years. So it was a kind of a recent discovery and a very recent sort of back and forth between science and how to treat other communities with respect. So we have seen climate change considerably. We saw ice ages. We saw warming periods, more ice ages. These are all very natural shifts. But we do have some puzzles because of them. One of the puzzles is what happened to the Neanderthals, because we see remains of them throughout Europe, all the way from the area we now know as Germany, all the way to the uh, the kind of small island peninsula we know as the Rock of Gibraltar. There's actually a cave inside that giant rock that has Neanderthal remains. They think it was some of the last of the Neanderthals in Europe. Um, and the thinking, because the Neanderthals were different than the modern humans, they were fairly well adapted. In fact, very well adapted to the areas they moved in. And when the climate changed, they had did not have the wherewithal, the brain matter that the more modern humans, the Homo sapiens moving in, to adapt to that. And so there is the idea that the Neanderthals, basically, they were very well suited for where they were until the climate changed and they died off. However, the Homo sapiens, even though they were not as well suited as the Neanderthals, had the advantage of the brain power to use tools and things of their making to adapt, and so that they could. So it's um, an interesting concept that even though these modern humans were not very, they did not have these exceptional talents that made them well suited in a single place. Being more generalist and being able to use the brain power allowed them a, a way to adapt. So that is one way of looking at why these modern humans were so successful, and why we managed to go everywhere. So we have the tools and the capability to adapt to wherever we go. We go to space. We go far underneath the sea, and we use tools to do that. So in many ways, that's one of the things that makes studying humans so interesting. So that's the end of the first chapter. Uh, as we start going through the book, we're going to see now our studies divided up into different places. But what we will see is patterns that move between each space, and that you want to pay attention to these patterns. Studying world history, you're not going to learn all of the history of the world. It's just too big. What you can, however, use this time in this semester to do is learn more about the humans, more about the human condition, and more about how we move, we adapt, we think, we create. Uh, and this makes us so interesting to observe and learn about, because we're learning about ourselves as well. We are the end product of everything we're going to be studying this semester, which is kind of fun. But it's starting at the very end of a mystery novel or mystery movie. We know how it's going to end. So let's find out how all the crimes, so to speak, happened. That's what we'll be doing. Anyway, that's the end of chapter 1. Thank you very much, and we'll be seeing you shortly in chapter 2. Goodbye.